Hey, Breaking Points. I'm joined by Krista Brown of the American Economic Liberties Project. She is a senior policy analyst, and she's also done a lot of really great writing about Ticketmaster and why this topic matters at a broader level. Definitely check out the link to a recent article she co-authored that appeared in the American Prospect a few weeks ago. Krista, let's just start for people who haven't been paying attention. There were obviously big Ticketmaster hearings last week in Congress. The president of Live Nation, the parent company of Ticketmaster, was there. At a baseline level, what was the Taylor Swift debacle and why were people sort of engaged with that?
Yeah. So back in November, Taylor Swift announced her Eras tour, which was expected to be one of the most massive tours kind of ever announced. And Live Nation, it's important to note, was not the concert promoter for this massive tour. However, because of the control they have on the ticketing industry, they were almost entirely the ticketing service for all 55 of her or 52 of her shows. So, the tour was announced. There was a pre-sale, which was supposed to get everyone who was kind of a loyal fan in line before the general public. But Live Nation, Ticketmaster quickly failed, and there were people who spent the entire day in line being booted off multiple times, truly seeing tickets upwards of $20,000 on a secondary marketplace, which made no sense because they had promised this would not be the outcome. And Taylor Swift made a statement quickly afterwards saying she was disappointed because they had promised her they could handle the volume. And they also blamed Taylor Swift, saying, well, you haven't done a tour for 4 years, so we couldn't expect this volume. But ultimately, it was just a disaster. Very few people who hoped to get tickets got them. And it launched a hearing, the first hearing of the year.
So the real question here, I get if you're a Swiftie, why this would be a painful experience, both the time and also not seeing her perform for the first time in years. But why is this something that Congress wants to get engaged with in the first place?
Yeah. So, as we heard about kind of very quickly after the Taylor Swift fiasco, the Department of Justice is investigating Live Nation as a antitrust matter, kind of a monopoly abuse issue. And so this hearing ultimately, I believe, was to support that effort from the Department of Justice, both to inform the public about what's going on much more broadly than with Taylor Swift. They have dominance throughout the entire music industry. Touring, as the CEO has said, the CEO of Live Nation makes up 95% of artists' income. So it's very important, almost the entire income source. And they control all of it. As I briefly mentioned, Taylor Swift did not have them as their concert promoter, but she had AEG, their main competitor, and yet she could not stay out of their ecosystem. They failed, and I can guarantee you if she runs another tour, she will still have to face Live Nation.
So you were actually at the hearings. So what were the main, other than, members getting the obvious like TV hits and stuff that really matter, of course, what were the main takeaways that you had from watching?
Yeah, the main takeaway, bottom line, is that both Republicans and Democrats were in agreement that Live Nation, there's something bad going on with their behavior. They're a dominant figure. Various members honed in on the ways that they abuse that dominance, but there was no one defending Live Nation. The president who was there was on the hot seat for sure. I also thought it was important that, given this hearing was compiled pretty quickly because it was the new year, they were able to get an independent venue and promoter, from Jam Productions. They got artists to speak on the record, and then they had a competitor, SeatGeek, there, all of whom really highlighted the various ways that Live Nation abuses the industry or abuses their position within the industry, so that artists honed in on the aspects of no negotiating room. When they settle up a term sheet at the end of the night, it is not like they are on an even playing field, and they know that. The SeatGeek, president, I believe, he was there talking about how it's extremely hard to compete for contracts. And then Jam Productions was at, he spoke about it back in 2009. So he basically said it's the same for the past 10 years, but has only gotten worse. And that was important for them to hear and important to be on the record.
And something I want to capture for folks, it's kind of funny. We're doing our Breaking Points live show in Austin, and I'm pretty sure we're doing that through Ticketmaster this week. So this is a really visceral feeling I'm doing with this interview. But I'd love for you to talk real quick about like just how powerful Ticketmaster is, just given you kind of hinted at this with the 95% of shows, but like Ticketmaster made more money than the entire record industry in 2021, which is also wild. But if this is referencing your piece in the American Prospect on the dark history of Ticketmaster, it's kind of wild to hear that, because if you think about it, there must have not even been that many shows in 2021 because of COVID. So that was just basically them operating, with, basically at half capacity. So yeah, talk about that power.
Yeah. And I mean, I would probably say less than half capacity at that point in time, but absolutely. So they have various business lines and revenue streams. The one that brings in the most profit is their ticketing service, Ticketmaster. And they dominate the market. They have a roughly over 90% of NFL contracts, 83% of NBA, 87% of NFL. So they control those venues and these massive streams of income. But once you kind of lift up the hood of the car here to say they also control so many other business lines. So they have the hospitality industry under their thumb. When you look at where concessions go for all of these festivals, they have the largest concert promotion company, Live Nation, that manages the largest artists like Dua Lipa, Bad Bunny. They started with Maroon 5 when they bought Irving Azoff's artist management company in the early 2000s. So they have kind of a grasp of every way that an artist or anyone in the artist community could be making money. And whenever they feel a threat, they either acquire or come in with some insanely exclusionary contract to maintain their dominance.
So that's a good pivot into what exactly you personally, Krista Brown, want to happen with Ticketmaster. Obviously, the stakes are really high there. It seems as if the takeaway is you would want to have, and you, I mean broadly, I mean the antitrust movement would want to have a ticketing industry that's not controlled by one main player, where you would have diversity, you'd have competition. That's where the kind of like, ironically enough, like the marketplace actually kind of comes in. There's like a weird, like the system isn't particularly capitalistic versus having one that's more capitalistic. So how would you go about getting that? Because you're not going to have competitors launch. Is this as simple as the DOJ saying, you know what, we're going to unwind the Live Nation Ticketmaster merger? What's the takeaway from your end?
Yeah, I wish it was that simple. It's definitely not. These two, Live Nation and Ticketmaster, were under an exclusive agreement since the early 1990s. And I'm sure if there was kind of a simple breakup, something like that would form again. So in my mind, something that would be really important, number one, yes, you need to break up that company to its kind of various parts so that there isn't a way for them to leverage their dominance in a few different lines. But then you would need to put up guardrails and basically say exclusive contracts are forbidden for 10 years. And that would likely drive investment for other competitors to come into the industry because, without that, they have all the relationships. There has been a lot of fear of retaliation and proven out to be actual retaliation when someone kind of enters the picture as a competitor. So yeah, it would be breaking up the company. It would be a ban on exclusive contracting for a period of time. And then in my mind, probably also not allowing them to, actually outright own venues, because that gives them capture of the industry and of entertainment in ways that, again, would not invite fair competition. But one thing that I think is important to note that was mentioned back in the Pearl Jam hearings in the early 90s is that the ticketing service in some ways makes sense to have one platform. If you or I are going to, if I'm coming to your guys's Breaking Points show, then I might not want to compare prices on 10 different platforms. I might just want to have one platform. And the only way you can really do that fairly without, profit seeking motives getting in the way is to have it regulated kind of like a utility. And this guy back at the hearing in the 90s mentioned that. So I don't think any regulators are really thinking about that as a solution right now. But it would be potentially an option for purely the ticketing service, still spinning out, separating Live Nation and Frontline Management, their artist management company. But that's one kind of alternative way to go about maybe enforcing various regulations.
And I think the way we can close this interview, I'd just love to hear your broader articulation of like the principles that are at stake here, because this is the cool story, because everyone's thinking about T Swift. Everyone likes to go to shows, go to venues. It's why the industry is so powerful in the first place. But it kind of annoys me when you see folks say like, oh, like who cares, this doesn't really matter, because obviously this is just a very direct example of how monopolistic practices have impact consumers. So just give me like the broader picture that AELP or organization is thinking about here.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, it is hard for people to understand the ways that consolidation influences their life. And it can be felt, with supply chain constraints or potentially with food prices going up. But I think one that consistently hits home is when you get these kind of like indescribable fees that make people so angry every time they get on the Ticketmaster platform. And if you just go on Twitter, like there are constantly horror stories from one place or another about the experience of this platform, that there is no other option to actually attend or kind of support an artist that you like. So this story to me is a way that, one, drives home consolidation as an issue for people who are not intertwined with kind of the broader economic outcomes, and also the ways in which regulators can reinstill faith in our regulatory body, because we've not really done that for a long period of time. There have been many instances in which Live Nation and Ticketmaster have acted very monopolistically. And if regulators with this much attention can actually do something about it, it's really important to kind of show that they are willing to go up against corporate power and uphold the laws that we have, and actually listen to people who are talking about the abuses that they feel on a day-to-day basis.
Well, Krista, this has been really great. We've got it in the description on this video, but can you just shout out your American Prospect piece for people who want to learn more about like the darker, longer term history that goes back to the 70s and 80s? I really enjoyed the piece.
Thanks so much.
And that's the dark history of Ticketmaster in the American Prospect.
Yes.